I was just a boy of 12 when she came to me, in a dream so vivid that it has stayed with me ever since. It wasn't like the usual dreams I had, filled with fleeting images and fading memories. This one was different, clear, sharp, and hauntingly real. In the dream, I found myself standing in an unfamiliar place, a landscape bathed in a soft golden light that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The air was warm, carrying with it the scent of flowers that I couldn't quite place. And then, out of the shimmering light, she appeared. She was beautiful, more beautiful than anyone I had ever seen. Her skin glowed with a soft radiance, and her eyes, deep and dark, seemed to look right through me, as if she could see into my very soul. Her hair flowed like a river of midnight, cascading down her back in soft waves. She moved with a grace that was almost unnatural, each step she took as silent as the night. As she approached, I felt a strange mix of emotions, fear, awe, and something else I couldn't quite understand. There was something otherworldly about her, something that made it impossible to look away. She was like a queen from an ancient story, a figure of both power and beauty, commanding and yet strangely kind. She stopped in front of me and smiled, a smile that was both comforting and unsettling. "My name is Queen Ene," she said, her voice as soft as a whisper and as powerful as a command. "I've been watching you and I like you. I want to be part of you. Will you marry me?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. At that age, I didn't fully understand what it meant to be married, but I knew it was something significant, something life changing. And here was this magnificent woman, this Queen Ene, offering me something that seemed beyond my wildest dreams. She continued, "If you agree to marry me, I will give you anything you want. All your wishes, all your desires will be fulfilled. You will have everything your heart desires." The temptation was unlike anything I had ever felt before. The promise of having anything I wanted. How could a young boy like me resist such an offer? But even as she spoke, there was a part of me that felt a twinge of doubt, a small voice in the back of my mind whispering that something wasn't quite right. Yet, her presence was overwhelming and her offer was too tempting to ignore. I didn't know how to respond, but I felt drawn to her, as if she had held some kind of power over me. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she could indeed give me everything I ever wanted. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, the dream began to fade. The golden light dimmed, and I felt myself being pulled back, away from her, away from the strange, beautiful place. I wanted to stay, to hear more, but I had no control over what was happening. I woke up with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon, shining through the window. I lay there trying to catch my breath, feeling as though I had just been somewhere else, somewhere real. The memory of Queen Ene was still fresh in my mind. Her face, her voice, even the smell of her perfume, a sweet, intoxicating scent that lingered in the air around me. It felt so real, as if she had been right there beside me. I could still feel the warmth of her touch, the way her fingers had lightly brushed against my arm. I sat up in bed, confused and unsure of what to think. It was just a dream, I told myself. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. There was something about it that felt different, something that made me wonder if it was just more than a dream. How could it be possible that Queen Ene was real? Had she really visited me? Or was it all just a figment of my imagination? As I lay back down, trying to make sense of it all, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life had just changed in some way, that something had been set in motion. The dream or whatever it was had left a mark on me, one that I knew I wouldn't be able to forget. That night, as I drifted back to sleep, Queen Ene's words echoed in my mind. I will give you anything you want. The temptation of her promise was too strong to ignore, and as much as I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if it wasn't just a dream? What if she could really give me everything I wanted? Little did I know that this was just the beginning, the first step down a path that would lead me to places I could never have imagined. A few days after that first dream, Queen Ene came back to me. This time, her appearance was even more striking, if that was possible. I was once again in that strange glowing place, surrounded by the same warmth and light that seemed to be her signature. But this time, she didn't come empty handed. In her hands were gifts, beautiful shiny things that dazzled my young eyes. There were toys and gadgets, phones, things I had only seen in shops or on television, items I had wished for in passing but never thought I could have. I stared in awe at the collection of treasures she presented before me. It was as if she knew exactly what I wanted, even those things I hadn't spoken of to anyone. She smiled at me, that same comforting yet unsettling smile, and repeated her offer from before. Do you remember what I told you? Marry me, and I will give you anything you want. Her voice was soft, almost hypnotic, and it was clear she was not just offering me gifts, but a life filled with whatever I desired. I was just a boy, after all. The temptation of all those gifts and the promise of even more was overwhelming. How could I say no? In my young mind, the idea of having everything I wanted seemed like a dream come true. What harm could there be in saying yes? So I agreed. I said the words she wanted to hear. Yes, I will marry you. As soon as the words left my mouth, I felt a strange sensation wash over me, a mix of excitement and a tiny, nagging feeling of uncertainty that I quickly brushed aside. I had no idea what I was really agreeing to. I only saw the immediate benefits, the gifts, the wealth, the admiration of others. After that night, my life began to change in ways I could never have imagined. Things started happening almost immediately. I would wake up to find the exact things I had been longing for suddenly within my reach. If I wanted a new toy, it appeared. If I desired a particular book or gadget, it would somehow find its way to me. My grades in school changed. My friends noticed the change as well. They saw the new things I had, the ease with which I seemed to get whatever I wanted, and they couldn't help but be envious. They asked me how I was able to get all these things, but I couldn't tell them the truth. How could I explain that it was all because of a mysterious lady who visited me in my dreams? I became the center of attention among my peers. They looked up to me, admired me, and in some cases envied me. I enjoyed the feeling of being special, of having something they didn't. It felt good to be the one everyone else wanted to be like. I started to believe that I had made the right choice. After all, what could be wrong with getting everything I had ever wanted? But even as I reveled in my newfound status, a small part of me wondered about Queen Ene and the true cost of what I had agreed to. I pushed those thoughts aside, too caught up in the excitement of it all to pay attention to the quiet doubts creeping into my mind. As time went on, the line between dreams and reality began to blur. What started as visits from Queen Ene during my sleep soon extended into my waking hours. At first, it was subtle, a fleeting shadow, a whisper in the wind, but then she began to manifest herself more clearly. I would see her or feel her presence when I was alone. It wasn't long before she was there with me, as real as anyone else, though only I could see her. People see me talking to nobody. Her presence became a constant in my life, no longer restricted to the night. She watches over me, sometimes comforting. In a particular day, some boys were about to bully me. She dealt with the boys. Her presence is often unsettling. It was as though she had crossed over from whatever realm she came from and was now part of my everyday world. The dream has seeped into my reality, and I was no longer sure where one ended and the other began. With her increased presence came an intensity I hadn't expected. Queen Ene was no longer content with just being near me. She wanted me all to herself. Her jealousy was fierce and unrelenting. Anytime I showed interest in another girl, or even spent too much time with my male friends, she would appear, her eyes flashing with anger. She made it clear that I was hers and hers alone. It didn't matter that I was growing up, that I was supposed to be meeting people, forming relationships, exploring the possibilities of love. Queen Ene would have none of it. She would whisper in my ear, her voice cold and demanding, telling me that no one else could have me. Slowly, I began to withdraw from others, isolating myself more and more. My friends didn't understand why I had become so distant, and I couldn't explain it to them. How could I tell them about the spirit wife who controlled my every move? Despite the growing tension, there was something about Queen Ene that I couldn't completely resist. She had abilities that defied explanation, powers that both fascinated and frightened me. She could predict the future with an accuracy that was beyond anything I had ever seen. She would tell me about things that were going to happen, minor incidents at first, like a friend getting injured or a storm approaching. But as time went on, her predictions grew more serious, and they were always correct. On one of my birthdays, she told me she would give me a gift. When she opened her hand, it was a piece of paper with numbers written on it. She said she wanted me to have a car and suggested I involve my father. She advised me to ask him to lend me money for something and assured me I would pay him back. To my surprise, my father gave me 10,000 naira. I used the money to place a bet with the number she gave me, and I won millions, which I used to buy my first car. This power of hers was terrifying in its certainty. It was a reminder of how powerful she was, how much control she had over my life. There were moments when I was in awe of her, but mostly I was afraid. I began to realize that I was dealing with something far beyond my understanding, something dangerous and unpredictable. As I grew older, the reality of my situation became more apparent. By the time I turned 40, I knew I couldn't live like this forever. I had fallen in love with Nkechi, a real human, someone I could build a life with. I wanted a family, children, a future that was grounded in the real world, not in the shadowy, uncertain realm that Queen Ene inhabited. But I knew that leaving Queen Ene would not be easy. She had given me so much wealth, power, things that had made me the envy of others, but at a cost I was only now beginning to understand. I had no idea how she would react to my decision to marry Nkichi, but I knew it wouldn't be good. As expected, when I told Queen Ene of my intentions, her reaction was explosive. She appeared before me, her face twisted with anger and hurt. Why would you leave me? She cried, her voice echoing with betrayal. I have given you everything. You are mine and you will always be mine. Her words were like a curse, and I felt a cold dread settle over me. I tried to explain, to tell her that I needed to live a real life, to have children and a family, but she wouldn't listen. Her anger only grew, and with it, her control over me tightened. It was as though a switch had been flipped. Queen Ene, who had once been a source of pleasure and comfort, became a relentless force of torment. She began to make demands that went against everything I wanted. She would appear physically, forcing me to comply with her wishes, sex, exhausting me with it, even when I was sleeping. I couldn't escape her. She was always there, in the back of my mind, whispering, cajoling, threatening. I knew I had to find a way out, but I was trapped. The gift she had given me had turned into chains, binding me to her will. My life was spiraling out of control, and I felt powerless to stop it. The very things that had once brought me joy were now the source of my deepest despair. And through it all, Queen Ene continued to remind me that I was hers and that I always would be. After years of being under Queen Ene's influence, I finally gathered the courage to resist her. The realization that I could not continue living under her control fueled my determination. I decided to break away from her grasp, starting with a decision to refuse any further intimacy. I hoped that by denying her what she wanted most, I could weaken her hold on me. But Queen Ene was not one to let go easily. My resistance only provoked her wrath, and she retaliated in ways that were beyond my worst fears. My health, which had been robust for most of my life, began to decline rapidly. I felt constantly drained, as if the very essence of my life was being siphoned away. Each day, I woke up feeling more exhausted than the last, my energy sapped by an unseen force. Worse still, my financial situation took a turn for the worse. Deals that had once been guaranteed successes began to fall apart inexplicably. Money that I had invested vanished into thin air, and my business ventures started to fail one by one. It was as if a curse had been placed on everything I touched, and I knew that Queen Ene was behind it all. As my health and finances crumbled, so too did my relationships. Nkechi, the woman I loved, began to distance herself from me. The once strong bond we shared began to weaken, and I could sense her slipping away. Friends who had once admired and envied me now looked at me with pity or suspicion. I had become a shadow of the man I once was, and they didn't know how to help me. I felt isolated, trapped in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. Every attempt I made to regain control of my life was met with more obstacles, and it became clear that Queen Ene was determined to destroy me if she couldn't have me. The isolation was suffocating. I was losing everyone and everything I had ever cared about, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The life I had once enjoyed was slipping through my fingers like sand, and all that remained was the cold, relentless presence of Queen Ene. As the situation worsened, I began to realize just how dangerous my circumstances had become. Queen Ene's influence was far stronger than I had ever imagined, and her determination to keep me under her control was terrifying. Every aspect of my life was being systematically dismantled, and I felt powerless to stop it. Desperation set in as I watched everything I had worked for unravel before my eyes. My health was failing, my finances were in ruins, and Nkechi was growing more distant with each passing day. I knew that if I didn't find a way to break free, I would lose everything. In the depths of my despair, I began to search for answers. I knew I couldn't face Queen Ene alone. Her powers were beyond anything I could handle on my own. I needed help, but I didn't know where to turn. The situation seemed hopeless, and I was haunted by the fear that I would never be free of her. The struggle had taken everything from me, and I was left with a gnawing sense of dread. Queen Ene had made it clear that she would stop at nothing to keep me in her grasp, and I knew that my only hope lay in finding a way to escape her before it was too late. As my life spiraled further out of control, I realized that I couldn't handle the situation on my own anymore. The weight of Queen Ene's presence was suffocating, and I knew that if I didn't get help soon, I would lose everything, including my sanity. So I did the only thing I could think of. I began to reach out to others, desperate for someone to believe me and offer assistance. I started confiding in close friends, people I thought would understand. But as I shared my story, their reactions were far from what I had hoped for. They looked at me with confusion and concern, their faces betraying their disbelief. Some tried to be supportive, offering words of comfort that felt hollow. Others outrightly dismissed my story, suggesting that I was overworked or stressed, and that my experiences were nothing more than vivid dreams or hallucinations. The more I tried to explain, the more isolated I felt. It seemed that no one could grasp the reality of what I was going through. They couldn't comprehend the existence of Queen Ene, a spirit wife who had claimed me as her own and was now destroying my life because I dared to resist her. Their disbelief only deepened my sense of despair. I was alone in this battle, with no one who truly understood or could offer the help I so desperately needed. Despite the lack of support, I knew I couldn't give up. The thought of being trapped by Queen Ene forever, of losing everything I had worked for, and everyone I loved was too terrifying to accept. I was determined to find a way to break free, even if it meant fighting this battle alone. I began to research on my own, searching online for stories similar to mine, hoping to find someone who had faced a spirit wife and lived to tell the tale. I delved into books, articles, and anything I could find about the supernatural, desperate for a clue. that would lead me to a solution. I even reached out to religious leaders, hoping that someone in the spiritual community might understand what I was going through. But each attempt seemed to end in failure. Those I approached either didn't believe me or didn't know how to help. The few who did acknowledge the possibility of my problem asked me to pay hundreds of thousands for deliverance, or rituals that felt incomplete and ineffective. I followed their instructions as best as I could, but nothing seemed to work. Queen Ernest's hold on me remained as strong as ever, and with each passing day, I felt myself slipping further into despair. The struggle was exhausting, both mentally and physically. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the next attack from Queen Ene, wondering how much longer I could hold on. But giving up was not an option. I knew that if I didn't keep fighting, I would lose everything, and that was a fate I couldn't accept. Though I was alone in my struggle, I held onto a small glimmer of hope. Somewhere out there, I believed was the answer I was searching for. I just had to keep going, to keep fighting until I found the key to breaking free from Queen Ene's grasp once and for all. Desperation had driven me to seek help in every corner, but it wasn't until I met a compassionate pastor that I finally found someone who truly understood my plight. He was a man with spiritual understanding and wisdom, with years of experience dealing with spiritual matters that most people dismissed as mere superstition. Unlike the others, he didn't scoff or look at me with disbelief when I recounted my encounters with Queen Ene. Instead, he listened intently, his eyes reflecting both understanding and concern. The pastor explained that what I was dealing with was not uncommon in the spiritual realm. He told me that spirit wives were known to forge strong and often destructive ties with their human counterparts, binding them in ways that were difficult to break. However, he assured me that with prayers, it was possible to sever those ties and reclaim my life. He provided me with a clear set of instructions, emphasizing the importance of genuine repentance. He explained that the first step in breaking free from Queen Ene's hold was to repent sincerely for any sins or actions that may have opened the door to her influence. This, he said, was crucial in seeking God's forgiveness and protection. With humility and a heavy heart, I confessed my sins, acknowledging the ways in which I had unknowingly allowed Queen Ene into my life. The pastor then guided me through specific prayers designed to break the spiritual ties between me and the spirit wife. These were not ordinary prayers. They were fervent pleas to God, filled with the determination to reclaim my freedom. Each prayer session was intense as I poured every ounce of strength and emotion into breaking the bonds that had held me captive for so long. With the pastor's guidance, I embraced the spiritual battle with newfound resolve. Every day, I followed his instructions with unwavering diligence. The prayers became a lifeline, a source of strength that I clung to in the midst of my turmoil. I could feel the weight of Queen Ene's presence gradually lifting, her influence slowly receding with each prayer I uttered. It wasn't an easy process. There were days when it felt like progress was slow and doubts began to creep in, but I refused to give up. The pastor had warned me that the battle would be difficult, that Queen Ene would not let go without a fight. But he also reminded me that God's power was far greater than any spirits, and that as long as I remained steadfast in my faith, I would emerge victorious. Gradually, I began to notice changes in my life. The oppressive feeling that had once hung over me like a dark cloud started to dissipate. I found myself sleeping more peacefully at night without the haunting dreams that had plagued me for years. My energy levels began to improve, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace that I had almost forgotten existed. Queen Anne's presence, once so overwhelming and consuming, began to fade into the background. I could sense her weakening, her grip on my life loosening as I continued to fight back with prayer and faith. The change was gradual, but it was undeniable. I was finally breaking free from her grasp. The pastor continued to support me throughout this journey, offering prayers and words of encouragement whenever I needed them. He reminded me that this was not just about breaking free from Queen Ene, but also about rebuilding my relationship with God and living a life that was truly free in every sense of the word. As Queen Ene's hold on me weakened, I felt a profound sense of relief. The battle was not yet over, but I knew that the worst was behind me. With the pastor's guidance, my faith, and God's grace, I was on the path to true freedom, a freedom that I had fought so hard to attain. With Queen Ene finally out of my life, the dark cloud that had overshadowed my existence lifted, revealing a world full of possibilities. The sense of freedom was overwhelming, like stepping out of a long, oppressive storm into the warmth of the sun. For the first time in years, I could look towards the future with hope. Nkechi, who has stood by me through the most challenging times, became my beacon of light. Our love, once tested by forces beyond our control, now blossomed with a renewed sense of purpose. We married in a ceremony that felt like a rebirth, not just for me, but for both of us. Surrounded by family and friends, I vowed to cherish and protect her, knowing that we had both endured so much to reach this moment. Starting a family was a dream come true. The laughter of our children filled our home, a sound that seemed to chase away any lingering shadows of the past. Each day I found strength and solace in the love that we shared, and I knew that Queen Ene's influence was truly behind me. Our home became a sanctuary, a place where I could finally heal and rebuild the life I had almost lost. Despite the joy of my new life, I never forgot the lessons I had learned during my ordeal. The experience with Queen Ene had taught me the importance of vigilance, of staying connected to my faith, and of seeking help when it was needed. I realized that life could be unpredictable, with challenges that could appear when least expected. But I also knew that with faith, determination, and the right support, any challenge could be overcome. I became more mindful of the spiritual aspects of life, always aware that there were forces behind the physical world that could influence our lives in profound ways. I maintained a close relationship with the pastor who had helped me break free, regularly seeking his guidance and wisdom. Together with Nkechi, I ensured that our home was a place of spiritual strength, where faith and love were the foundations of our family. I also took it upon myself to help others who might find themselves in similar situations. Though my story was extraordinary, I knew that there were many others who struggled with unseen forces and needed someone to believe them, just as I had needed someone to believe me. I shared my experiences when appropriate, offering support and guidance to those who needed it. As the years passed, I came to understand what true freedom meant. It wasn't just the absence of Queen Ene's influence, it was the ability to live my life fully and authentically without fear or restraint. It was the power to choose my path, to love freely, and to embrace the future with confidence. The spirit wife's grip on my life had been broken, and in its place I had found love, happiness, and peace. Every day was a reminder of how far I had come, from the boy haunted by a beautiful yet dangerous entity to the man who had reclaimed his life and destiny. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also shaped me into the person I was meant to be. I had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, and for that, I was eternally grateful. My life with Nkechi and our children was more than I had ever dreamed of, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to conquer even the most formidable challenges. I was finally free, and in that freedom, I found everything I had ever wanted. Also, I discovered if there is a man to pray, there is a God to answer.
Thanks for watching. Support my channel by subscribing, liking, sharing, and turning on notifications to stay updated on new stories.